Introduce Professor Alicia Kowaltowski, the laureate for Latin America and the Caribbean, recognized for her fundamental contributions to biochemistry. Please, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
I know how this works here. Okay. So thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to try to convince everybody that science is indispensable by giving you a mini lecture on my favorite field of science, which is metabolism. And basically I'm going to tell you today where all our food goes. So I don't know if you ever thought of this, but an average human being eats about 500 kilos of food a year. And no human being ever gained 500 kilos a year, so where does all that food go? And basically where all that food goes is into metabolism and fueling what life is, keeping you alive. So I want to explain that a little bit more to you today. So what is metabolism? Metabolism is a word that's used by the general population a lot. It's basically associated with your tendency to gain or lose weight, but it's actually a lot more than that. Metabolism is a collection of chemical reactions that transform molecules within living beings. And these chemical reactions and these transformations are the definition of what life is. Every living being must be able to transform molecules. So metabolism is the very cornerstone of what a living being is. So how does metabolism happen in an animal such as ourselves? Basically, you're eating food which has different molecules that are shown here with different colors, and this is going to be transformed into different molecules within your body and within your cells that can give you energy to do your daily functions, to think, to move, for your organs to function. Now, we aren't a perfect machine, just like every car isn't a perfect motor. There's a little bit of loss of energy, so we also generate a little bit of heat. And also, we don't only generate energy through metabolism. We also break down the molecules in our food into smaller molecules that are kind of like building blocks, like Legos, that we then use to put together and make the molecules that are our bodies. We're constantly renewing the molecules in our bodies. And the fact that we break down these molecules in our food and then build the molecules in our bodies is the reason why you can eat baguettes your whole life long and you're never going to look like a baguette, because you're going to transform those molecules in your food into the basic building blocks and then build up molecules that make our bodies. So basically, any chemical, any molecule within your body is going to be transformed through metabolism. And typically, metabolism involves stepwise chemical transformations in which that orange molecule that's there becomes the red molecule through many different steps. Also, most of our molecules can follow different metabolic pathways. They can be transformed into different molecules. So you can see that the orange molecule there can become the yellow or green molecule. And the collection of different step-by-step transformations in different molecules in our bodies is actually huge. So this is a simplified depiction, and it really is simplified, of a human metabolic map. It's basically the structures of the molecules within our body and the transformations that these molecules undergo becoming different molecules. And we organize this in this form of metabolic maps. And there's a lot more to these maps. This is just a simplified version because you couldn't see the whole map itself. Now, if you look at this, it looks like a map of a road system of a very complicated city, maybe the road system of Sao Paulo, where I live, a megalopolis of some 20 million people with really bad traffic. And I think this comparison with road maps is actually a really good one, because there's a lot of parallels between how we organize our transportation systems and how metabolism is organized. For example, in metabolism, you have slow neighborhoods, where few molecules are going to be transported and transformed, and they're kind of in the neighborhoods, in the outskirts of the metabolic map. And more to the center of the metabolic map, you're going to have these metabolic avenues where lots of molecules are transformed. For example, where you're transforming all those carbohydrates in that baguette that we just ate. And then very much in the center of that map, you can see this huge round plaza there. That's the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, which is where we break down the molecules that come from carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids and fats into CO2, into carbon dioxide, and breathe that out, and also generate a lot of energy for our cells. So that's the very center of metabolism. Also, this comparison with metabolic maps, I think, is apt, because in our cities, we organize streets with one-way roads and two-way roads. So two-way roads allow a molecule A to become a molecule B, and also B to be transformed back in A. There's both pathways. One-way roads allow A to become B, but not B to become A. And the existence of one-way roads in metabolism actually explains why we are metabolically programmed for obesity. So I want to explain that a little bit more to you. So all of us eat carbohydrates, and we should eat carbohydrates. A diet that contains about 65% of complex carbohydrates, such as starch, is considered the best diet in terms of life and health span. So continue eating your baguettes. It's a very good source of energy for all of us. All of us should also eat proteins, because we need proteins, as Dr. Yan really nicely showed. Proteins are very important for many different functions in our cells, and we can only make proteins from proteins. So we need to eat proteins. Proteins are also a source of energy in our cells, and proteins can be transformed into carbohydrates. But this is a one-way pathway. Carbohydrates cannot become proteins. We should also eat fats and oils. This is the minor necessity out of the three, but they're also important for our health. I think everybody knows that fats and oils, lipids, are a good source of energy. In fact, in general, lipids have about double the amount of calories per gram that carbohydrates or proteins have. I think also everybody knows that if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, too many baguettes, you can transform these carbohydrates into fats, and you will store them as fats. This is a one-way pathway. You cannot transform fats back into carbohydrates. You will also store any excess protein that you eat as fats. We can transform proteins into fats, but not fats back into proteins. So it's a metabolic reality that anything that you eat in excess will be transformed into fats, and fats can only become energy. So our metabolism is basically designed to store any excess nutrients as fat. And this has an evolutionary reason. Fats are much more efficient in storing energy. There's about double the calories in them. There's another reason why we're gaining weight, which is evolutionary in terms of our brains. We like high-calorie foods, and we are evolutionarily programmed to eat them so we could survive in scarcity. We don't live in scarcity anymore, so we have an obesity epidemic. And this is caused by evolution. So obesity became a serious problem in terms of health spans and in terms of lifespans. Obesity increases the incidence of many different diseases, of cancer, of type 2 diabetes, of Alzheimer's disease, of vascular disease, other neurological diseases. So we really have to understand the metabolic changes involved in obesity in order to understand these diseases better. And that's what my lab is really interested in. So in a nutshell, what does the Energy Metabolism Lab in São Paulo study? Well, first of all, we want to understand normal metabolism. That map looks very complex, but we still want to add more pathways to it and more molecules to it. We're doing this all the time. So we understand the chemistry of our own bodies. We're also studying how different diets, obesogenic and non-obesogenic diets, affect metabolism, what molecules are changed in these different diets. And we're studying how these metabolic changes induced by diets affect aging and diseases that are promoted by aging and promoted by different dietary interventions. And we're doing this in many different models. So we're studying metabolism at the level of mitochondria. There's a beautiful picture of a mitochondria on that. There, mitochondria are the batteries of the cell where that central plaza of metabolism happens. We're doing this in different cell types. We're doing this with different organs. We're doing this using rodent animal models and also in patient samples. And most of all, we're doing this at the level of the molecule. So again, I want to really emphasize the importance of understanding the chemistry of life. Because when we uncover new molecules that are involved in biological processes, we open a whole new gamma of targets that we can use to treat diseases that involve changes in those molecules. And here's the importance of really basic science, understanding these basic molecules that are changed. I'd just like to end by saying that I don't do this alone. I have a wonderful lab, all wearing pink here for this day. And these are the young students who do the work in my lab. And basically my job is to keep them healthy and keep them able to do this science. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. So again, we'll open the floor for questions, please. So again, if you please raise your hand if you have a question. Please go ahead.
So one of the challenges that we face, I think, in Canada is with some of the population of the native population from up north. As you know, metabolism is something that fluctuates because of its evolution. Over there, food was scarce, and so they had to develop this huge amount of reserve during the season where they could get their food, and all of a sudden. And after that, they would lose it, and they would have no diabetes, no problems. And now it's like, because food is all the time there. Is there a way that we could teach back a body to kind of modulate? How can we do that?
Yeah. So yes, there are lots of differences in personal tendencies for obesity and personal tendencies for hunger also. And there are lots of new mechanisms in which we have learned to curb some of these aspects. I think one of the big revolutions in the treatment of obesity that came recently are peptides that make you less hungry, and they are being shown every day to have effects also in obesity-related diseases. I'd really like to highlight how these peptides came to be from basic science. So they came to be from biology. They were inspired by nature. People were studying this animal called the Gile monster, which has peptides in its mouth, and it's trying to kill its prey through decreasing glucose in the blood of the animals that it eats. And people decided to try to study these peptides to use them as a diabetes drug, and started to modify these peptides to use as a diabetes drug. But within these modifications, they found a modification that really controlled hunger well and did not promote very low blood sugar levels, which are dangerous also. So it was kind of the perfect peptide to control hunger and to treat obesity specifically. And that's how the revolution of these drugs came, inspired by nature, but improved by man. And it's being continuously improved, and that's a really important aspect. So understanding these different mechanisms is really important. I'm going to give you a second example of how basic science changes metabolism, and this comes from Brazil. So my supervisor, Aníbal Versesi, was studying potato mitochondria in the 1990s in Brazil. And it was known since the 60s and 70s that there's this very important protein called the uncoupling protein in brown fat. Brown fat is not the fat that makes us fat. Brown fat is a fat that heats us up. It's really important for newborns to keep them warm. And it's also important for some mammals that hibernate, like bears. So they have to warm up when they're waking up. And we knew this function of brown fat. But Aníbal was there studying potato mitochondria, and he found the same protein in potatoes. Now, if a protein exists in potatoes, it's not exclusive to mammals, and it's not functionally important to heat the potato because the potato is not something like mammals that keep their temperature. So this kind of opened the eyes of the whole scientific community that this protein was much more ancient in terms of evolution and must have other functions. And because of this, they looked for this protein, found it in all sorts of other places, and found out that it's one of the main reasons why some people just don't tend to gain weight. They have a lot more activity of this protein as adults, while other people have a lot less of it and therefore tend to gain weight. So basically, they're just burning their calories and putting CO2 into the world and, promoting global warming. But that's how they keep thin. So basic science again.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm aware time
Sorry.
is clicking on, but we have a couple more questions, so please.
Well, I have another question for you. I was curious to hear your take concerning the aspect of transgenerational obesity, or the converse, when people have suffered from hunger. There was a report in Holland that had impact on some other aspect in the next generation. So what is your take on this?
Oh, there's a lot of studies on epigenetics of obesity, on how prior episodes of hunger affect obesity in the next generations. And that's a super interesting aspect of research also, especially because we have gone through different cycles. And also obesity of prior generations affects obesity in the next generations, which is super interesting. So there are so many models to study. I think we have jobs for many years, not only myself, but those wonderful students who were up there too. There's a lot to study.
Great, so there's really a need for science